Nurse Elena Vasquez knew she was about to lose another patient. The heart monitor in room 314 had been beeping irregularly for 20 minutes, and the man in the bed, David Martinez, 34 years old, was having seizures that no doctor could explain. His lips were turning blue, his breathing increasingly weak, and Elena had called the emergency team 3 times in the last 2 hours. "I need you to listen to me," Elena said for the 4th time to Dr. Peterson, who once again checked David's exams without finding answers. "He's not having a normal reaction to head trauma. Something else is happening." "Nurse Vasquez," Dr. Peterson sighed, clearly exhausted after a 6-hour surgery. "His vital signs are consistent with post-trauma complications. We've already increased pain medications and are monitoring his intracranial pressure." Eleanor looked at David, unconscious in bed, his face contorted with pain even while sleeping. In 5 years working the night shift at St. Vincent Hospital, she had developed an instinct that doctors called nurses' intuition. And right now, that instinct was screaming that David Martinez would die if she didn't do something. "Doctor, give me 5 minutes alone with him," she requested. "Please." Dr. Peterson looked at her as if she had lost her sanity. "Elena, are you suggesting you can cure something that 3 neurologists couldn't diagnose?" "I'm suggesting that maybe he needs something different from medications," she replied, gently touching David's pulse. "Sometimes when someone is fighting to come back, they just need to hear a voice that reminds them why it's worth fighting." Dr. Peterson hesitated, then checked his watch. 5 minutes. After that, if he doesn't stabilize, we'll have to consider more drastic measures. When the door closed, Elena pulled a chair next to David's bed. She had done this hundreds of times before, sitting with unconscious patients, talking to them, touching their hands, believing that somewhere deep inside they could hear. But this time was different. This time, she felt as if her own life depended on David waking up. "David," she whispered, taking his cold hand. "I know you can hear me. I know you're fighting to come back, but I need you to fight a little harder." That's when David opened his eyes for the first time in 3 days, looked directly at her, and murmured a single word that would change both their lives forever: "Help." Elena had chosen the night shift purposely. 5 years ago, when life still made sense, she worked during the day at the same hospital. She had a sunny apartment with plants that bloomed, yellow curtains that let the sun in during the morning, and a fiancé named Marcus who promised they would have children as soon as he got established in his law career. They had planned a honeymoon in Tuscany, chosen names for babies that didn't exist yet, and Elena had even started looking for houses in neighborhoods with good schools. She had worked extra shifts to save for the dress of her dreams. A simple ivory silk model she had seen in a magazine that cost more than she earned in 2 months. 3 days before the wedding, Marcus showed up at her apartment with the face she learned to recognize as serious talk. He sat on the edge of the bed they had chosen together and said the words that still echoed in her ears 5 years later: "Elena, I can't do this. I'm not ready for so much commitment. You deserve someone who's sure, and I'm not." In 72 hours, Elena had cancelled the wedding, returned the gifts, and watched her carefully constructed life crumble like a house of cards. Her parents had been in shock. They adored Marcus, called him the perfect son-in-law. Her friends didn't know what to say, torn between consoling her and asking questions about what had gone wrong. And Elena had done the only thing she knew how to do. She had signed up for the night shift and disappeared into the hospital's shadows. The night shift was where wounded people went to hide. Elena discovered this in the first week. Her co-workers had stories, complicated divorces, losses they couldn't overcome, people who simply preferred the solitude of early mornings to the chaos of days. It was an unofficial team of broken hearts, and Elena fit perfectly. Now, at 29, Elena was known as the Midnight Angel. Patients specifically asked for her. Families left thank you notes addressed to the dark-haired nurse who made my mother feel safe during the night. There was something about her presence that calmed even the deepest pain. Maybe it was the way she really listened, not just waiting for her turn to speak, but absorbing every word as if it were the most important thing in the world. Or maybe it was how her hands, small but firm, seemed to carry a calm that the most potent medications couldn't offer. But David Martinez was different. Since he had arrived at the hospital 3 days ago, unconscious after a severe car accident, Elena couldn't stop thinking about him. Maybe it was because he looked so young sleeping, or because no one had come to visit him. His charts only said freelance journalist, emergency contact, none, basic insurance. A 34-year-old man without family, without friends, close enough to be listed as emergency contact. Elena recognized loneliness because she lived it. For the last 3 nights, she had spent extra time in room 314, checking on David more frequently than necessary, adjusting pillows, talking to him about her day, even knowing he couldn't hear, or at least she thought he couldn't. "Don't stop," David said, when Elena hesitated at his room door the next night. His voice was hoarse, almost a whisper, but he was awake and looking directly at her. Elena almost dropped the medication tray she was carrying. "David, you're awake. I need to call the doctor." "Please," he said, making a visible effort to speak. "Just stay a minute. Your voice was the first thing I heard when I woke up, the first thing that made me want to stay awake." Eleanor set the tray on the bedside table and approached cautiously. "Do you remember me talking to you?" "I remember fragments. You told me about your patients, about how the city got quiet at 3 in the morning, about how you like watching the sunrise after a difficult shift." David tried to sit up, but grimaced in pain. "Slowly," Elena said, helping adjust his pillows. "You suffered severe head trauma, multiple fractures. You were unconscious for 3 days. 3 days, David repeated, as if testing the words. "Feels like it was years or minutes. Time doesn't exist when you're floating." Elena checked his vital signs, more from habit than necessity. "How do you feel? Headache? Nausea? Blurred vision?" "All of that," he admitted, "but mostly confused. I remember the accident, some fragments, a truck, rain, the sound of metal shattering, but I don't remember getting here or the last 3 days, except for your voice." Elena felt something stir in her chest, a sensation she had buried so deeply she had forgotten it existed. "David, do you remember what your profession is? Where you live? Anyone who should be notified that you're awake?" He closed his eyes, concentrating. "Journalist. Freelancer. I lived in a small apartment on Cedar Street, number 236. He opened his eyes. "And no, there's no one to notify." The brutal honesty of the answer hit Elena like a punch to the stomach. "No one. Friends, colleagues, family. My parents died when I was 22. Car accident, ironically. I don't have siblings. As for friends," David gave a sad smile, "I was very good at working, not so good at maintaining relationships." Eleanor sat in the chair next to the bed, the same one she had used for the 3 previous nights. "Tell me about your work. Do you remember what you were doing before the accident?" David's face lit up slightly. "Investigation, corruption in nursing homes, elderly people being mistreated, medications being sold on the black market, staff stealing from residents." He paused. "I was coming back from an interview with a woman whose father had died under suspicious circumstances. She had managed to get evidence that he wasn't receiving his heart medications." "That sounds important." It is, David corrected. "These people depend on someone to tell their stories. And now," he tried to lift his right hand and grimaced, "I don't know if I'll be able to write again." Eleanor watched him try to move his fingers. There was movement, but uncoordinated, trembling. "It may take time for fine motor coordination to return to normal. You'll do physical therapy, occupational therapy." "What if it doesn't come back?" The question came out as a whisper. Elena didn't respond immediately. She had learned, in 5 years of night shifts, that sometimes honesty was less important than hope. But David was looking at her with eyes that had already seen too much, and she knew he deserved the truth. Then you find a new way to tell stories, she said finally. But you don't give up on the people who need them to be told. David studied her face for a long moment. You're not just a nurse, are you? What do you mean? The way you talk, like you understand about losing the thing you thought defined who you are. Elena felt her heart race. This conversation was dangerous, this connection that was forming. She had spent 5 years building walls around her heart, and this wounded stranger was finding cracks she didn't know existed. Everyone loses things, she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. The question is what you build in their place. And what have you built? Elena looked around the hospital room with its faded beige walls and perpetual smell of disinfectant. A life that doesn't hurt, she said honestly. Is that the same as a life worth living? The question hung in the air between them. Before Elena could answer, the door opened and Dr. Peterson entered, clearly surprised to find David awake. Mr. Martinez, what a relief to see you conscious. How are you feeling? Elena stood quickly, returning to professional mode. Vital signs stable. He's reporting headaches, some compromised motor coordination in his right hand, but he's lucid and responsive. Excellent. Let's do some basic tests. Dr. Peterson began examining David, testing his reflexes, asking questions about temporal and spatial orientation. Elena should have left the room, continued with her other responsibilities, but instead, she stayed near the wall, watching David respond to questions, seeing the frustration in his eyes when his coordination failed in simple tests. When Dr. Peterson finished, he smiled at David. All things considered, you're recovering very well. We'll want to keep you here for a few more days for observation, then we'll discuss plans for outpatient rehabilitation. After the doctor left, David looked at Elena. Thank you for staying. It was my job. No, that was more than work. You gave me something to hold on to when I was lost. He paused. Elena, that's your name, right? I heard Dr. Peterson call you that. She nodded. Elena, can I ask you something? Sure. Will you keep coming here? When I'm no longer your patient, I mean. Deep friends? Elena felt that crack in her walls widen a little more. David, you don't even know me. I know you sit next to unconscious strangers and talk to them about sunrises. I know you chose to work when the world is sleeping because that's when people need care the most. I know you speak like someone who understands about starting over. He held her gaze. That's more than I know about most people. Elena looked at this man who had arrived in her life unconscious and broken, and who was now asking for something she didn't know if she was ready to give. A chance to know him, really know him, outside the safe walls of the hospital. It could be dangerous, she said finally. What? Letting someone in, trusting again, believing that maybe this time the person might stay. David nodded slowly. It could be. But Elena, do you think a life without risk is really a life? It was the second difficult question he had asked in one night. And for the second time, Elena had no answer. Over the next 2 weeks, while David remained in the hospital, a routine developed between them. Elena made her normal rounds, but always saved room 314 for last. They talked, first about safe things like weather and news, then about deeper topics, books they liked, places they wanted to visit, dreams they had abandoned. David told Elena about his childhood as an only child of teachers, how he had started writing stories at 8 years old, how he had chosen journalism because he wanted to tell the stories no one else was telling. Elena shared less, but gradually revealed small details about her life, how she had always wanted to be a nurse since childhood, how caring for others made her feel useful when everything else seemed uncertain. You never mention your family? David observed one night while Elena checked his medications. There's not much to mention. Everyone has family, even if it's complicated. Elena stopped what she was doing. My parents live in Ohio. My sister is married and has 3 children. They are good people. We just don't understand each other very well. Because of your work, because of my choices. Elena finished organizing David's medications. They think I wasted my life when Marcus left me, that I should have gone back home, found someone suitable, settled down. Marcus was your fiancé. Elena nodded, surprised at herself for mentioning the name. What happened? He decided he wasn't ready for marriage 3 days before the ceremony. The words came out more bitter than Elena intended. David was quiet for a moment. That must have hurt. It hurt less than it should have, Elena admitted. And that scared me more than anything. I realized I was more in love with the idea of being married, of having a normal life, than with him specifically. And now you punish yourself by staying alone. The question hit her like a slap. I'm not punishing myself, I'm being careful. What's the difference? Eleanor didn't answer, but the question stayed with her for the rest of the night. David's improvement wasn't linear. There were good days, when his coordination seemed almost normal and he could write a few shaky sentences in a notebook Elena had brought him. And there were bad days, when intense headaches left him nauseated and confused, when the frustration of not being able to form simple words made him angry. It was during one of the bad days that Elena saw a different side of him. "It doesn't work," David shouted, throwing the notebook away from him after several failed attempts to write a simple sentence. "My fucking hand doesn't work." Elena had just entered the room for her midnight rounds. "David, it's okay. You were making progress yesterday." "Progress?" He laughed bitterly. "Elena, I was a journalist. I lived by my words, and now I can't write 'My name is David' without it looking like a child's scribble. It could take months to fully recover. What if I never fully recover? What if this is my new reality?" David looked at his hands as if they were foreign to him. "What kind of investigative journalist can I be if I can't even hold a phone properly?" Elena sat on the edge of his bed, something she rarely did with patience. "David, look at me." He reluctantly met her eyes. "Do you think your worth as a person was only in your ability to write? It was what I did best. It was who I was. No, it was what you did for a living. Who you are is here." Elena gently touched his chest over his heart. "In the way you care about people being mistreated. In the way you listen when I talk about my day. In the way you make me laugh even when you're in pain." David looked at her for a long moment. "How do you do that? What? Make me believe that maybe I'm worth something beyond what I can produce?" Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. "Because someone needs to remind you. The same way you remind me that maybe a life without risks isn't really a life." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words filling the space between them. "Eleanor," David said finally, his voice low, "can I tell you something? Something I haven't told any doctor." She nodded. "Sometimes, when the headache is really bad, I consider giving up. Just stopping trying to get better, because if this is my new normal, I don't know if I can live like this." Elena felt her heart race. "David, but then you show up, and somehow you make it all bearable, not just the headaches or frustration with my hand. You make the idea of a different future less scary." Elena knew she was reaching a point of no return. She could do what she always did. Maintain professional distance, offer generic comfort, protect her heart behind familiar walls. Or she could choose courage. "David," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you can't give up because I need you too." "How so?" "You make me remember who I was, before I was afraid to feel anything real. You make me want to risk my heart again, and that terrifies me because I don't know if I'm strong enough to survive being broken again." David extended his good hand and Elena took it. "What if we're both broken?" he asked. "What if we can't fix ourselves? Then at least we won't be broken alone." 2 weeks later, David was discharged from the hospital. Elena helped him organize his few belongings. Clothes that a social worker had retrieved from his apartment, the notebook scribbled with his writing attempts, some magazines that other hospital staff had brought him. "This place won't be the same without you," Elena said while folding his shirts. "Will you miss me?" "Probably more than I should." David stopped packing his small backpack. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Come with me to my apartment. I know it's strange, and I understand if you don't want to, but I'm afraid to go back there alone. And you're the only person I trust now." Elena hesitated. Leaving the hospital with a patient, going to his house, This crossed all the professional lines she had drawn for herself. But when she looked at David, she saw not a patient, but a man who was afraid and needed someone by his side. "Okay," she said, "but just for an hour." David's apartment was small and messy, not from his hospital recovery, but from the lifestyle of someone who lived alone and cared more about work than decoration. Books and newspapers piled on every surface, a kitchen that was clearly used only for coffee and microwave food, a bedroom with an unmade bed and more books. "Sorry for the mess," David said, obviously embarrassed. "I wasn't expecting visitors so soon." "Oh, it's not that bad," Elena lied gently, moving a pile of newspapers to sit on the couch. David sat next to her, closer than he really needed to. "Elena, can I ask you a personal question? You've been doing that for 2 weeks. What's your apartment like?" The question surprised her. "Why?" "Because I want to imagine where you go when you leave the hospital. I want to be able to picture you somewhere other than those corridors." Elena thought about her small, sterile apartment, too clean, too organized, with little personality beyond some plants she managed to keep alive and family photographs she rarely looked at. "It's quiet," she said finally. "Very quiet. Sometimes too quiet." "Do you get lonely?" "Constantly." The admission came out before she could stop it. David looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Can I tell you a secret?" She nodded. "I was coming back from an interview the night of the accident, but that wasn't all. I had spent the whole day thinking about how empty my life was, about how I had built a career but forgotten to build a life." He paused. "And then I woke up in the hospital, and the first voice I heard was yours, and I thought maybe this is a second chance. Not just to recover physically, but to do things differently this time." "Do what differently?" "Let someone in. Stop being so afraid of needing another person." Elena felt tears burn her eyes. "David, I know we met under strange circumstances. I know you have every right to be afraid after what happened with Marcus. But Elena, I would like the chance to really get to know you outside the hospital, like normal people do." Elena looked around David's messy apartment, then at his still trembling hands, then at his eyes that were asking for something she had sworn never to give again. "A chance." "A chance for what exactly?" she asked. "To find out if what I feel for you is real or just gratitude. To find out if you feel something for me beyond professional compassion." He took her hand with his good hand. "To find out if two broken people can help each other heal." Elena looked at their joined hands. His still trembled slightly, but it was warm, and it felt right in a way that scared her. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, one chance. But slowly, David. I don't know how to do this." "Trust someone again." He smiled, the first truly happy smile she had seen from him. "I don't know how to do this either. We can figure it out together." A week after David's discharge, they met for coffee. Elena arrived 15 minutes late because she had changed clothes 3 times, and David arrived 15 minutes early because he was too nervous to stay home. "You look different outside the hospital," David said, when she sat at the small cafe table he had chosen, a quiet place with few crowds, considering his still frequent headaches. "More human," Elena joked, but there was truth in the joke. "More accessible." They ordered coffee and sandwiches they barely touched, too busy talking. Outside the hospital environment, their conversations flowed differently. David talked about his physical therapy, about how he was slowly relearning to type, about small victories like managing to write his name legibly. Elena talked about her work in a way she had never shared with anyone, about patients who had marked her, about why she had chosen the night shift, about how caring for others had somehow helped her deal with her own pain. "Can I ask you about Marcus?" David said carefully. "Not if it's uncomfortable." Eleanor stirred her coffee, considering. "What do you want to know? How did you meet? What was the relationship like?" "We met in college. He was studying law. I was in nursing. It was easy, comfortable. He was ambitious. I was stable. We seemed to fit the role. But did you love each other?" Elena thought about this for a long time. "I thought so. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of him, the security he represented, the life we would plan together. She looked at David. It wasn't the kind of love that makes you want to be a better version of yourself. It was the kind of love that makes you try to fit into a more acceptable version of yourself. David nodded. I had some girlfriends over the years, but never anything serious. Always put work first. Told myself I was too busy for relationships, but the truth is, I was afraid to allow someone to be important enough to hurt me. And now? Now, I realized that the pain of being alone is worse than the risk of being hurt by someone you love. They looked at each other across the table, and Elena felt something stir in her chest. Not just physical attraction, though that existed, but something deeper, recognition, as if she were looking at someone who understood parts of her she rarely showed. David, she said finally, this scares me. What? The way you look at me. Like you can see through all the walls I've built, like you like what you see. I do like it very much. Even knowing I'm complicated, that I have trust issues, that I work night shifts to avoid real intimacy? David smiled. Elena, I'm a 34-year-old man who almost died alone because he was too proud or afraid to maintain real relationships, who now can't write properly and is trying to rebuild his entire identity. Complicated is relative. They laughed, and Elena felt something relax in her chest that had been tense for 5 years. Can I ask you something? David said, his voice more serious now. Sure. Can I see you again? Not as patient and nurse, but as two people who want to get to know each other better? Elena looked at her hands, then back at him. Yes, but David, we need to go slowly. I don't know how to do this without protecting myself. Then teach me how you need to be loved, he said simply. And I'll teach you how I need to be loved too. Over the next few weeks, they developed a careful routine. Coffee meetings twice a week, short walks when David's headaches allowed, phone conversations that stretched late into the night, their voices being the last sound each heard before sleeping. Elena discovered that David asked questions no one else did. Not about her work or plans, but about how she felt when the sun rose after a difficult shift, or what was her happiest childhood memory, or what made her laugh until she couldn't breathe. Are you interviewing me? She joked one afternoon while they walked through the park near the hospital. Maybe, he smiled. Old habits, but you talk about others all the time and never about yourself. There's not much to talk about. David stopped walking. Elena, you dedicate your life to caring for people in their most vulnerable moments. You chose the loneliest shift in the hospital so you could give real attention to patients when they need it most. You keep plants alive and remember the name of every person who works in the hospital, from doctors to cleaning staff. How is that not an incredible story? Elena sat on a nearby bench. Because I don't feel incredible. I feel like someone who's hiding. From what? From being hurt again. From trusting again. From living again. David sat next to her. Can I tell you a secret? Sure. I'm hiding too. Before the accident, I was so addicted to work I forgot how to have real relationships. When my last girlfriend left me 2 years ago, it didn't even hurt as much as it should have. And that scared me more than anything. Elena looked at him. Were you in love with her? I thought so. But looking back, I think I was in love with her convenience. She didn't demand much from me emotionally because I was always working. It was easy. And now I'm relearning how to be present, how to really listen, how to feel. They sat in silence, watching children play in the nearby playground. Elena, David said finally, you saved me in the hospital. Not just medically, but in a way I didn't even know I needed to be saved. You just needed someone to listen. No, I needed someone who understood what it was like to have to rebuild yourself from scratch. Someone who knew what it's like when your previous life simply disappears. Eleanor felt tears burn her eyes. What if we can't do it? If we're just two broken people trying to fix ourselves together? Then at least we won't be broken alone. That night, Eleanor finished her shift and for the first time in 5 years didn't want to go straight home. She wanted to call David, wanted to share the small victories and sadnesses of the shift. She wanted someone to know she existed beyond those hospital walls. When she got home, there was a message from him. I managed to write 500 words today about a nurse who taught me that healing isn't about going back to who you were, but about discovering who you can become. Thank you for teaching me that. Good night, Elena. She held the phone against her chest and for the first time in years smiled before falling asleep. 2 months after David left the hospital, he got his first freelance article since the accident. It wasn't investigative. It was a profile about healthcare professionals who worked night shifts. Eleanor was his first interview, but also the inspiration for the entire piece. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Elena asked as they prepared for the formal interview in his apartment, which was considerably more organized since she had started visiting him. "Use our story. Our story is about second chances," David said, adjusting the recorder with hands that still trembled slightly, but worked much better. "About how sometimes the worst things that happen to us take us exactly where we need to be." The interview was different from all the conversations they had had. David asked questions that made her think about why she had really chosen nursing, about what she had learned in the silent hospital corridors, about how caring for others had somehow healed her too. "Would you say you chose the night shift to run from life or to find it?" David asked. Elena thought carefully. "At first, definitely to run, but now I think it was to find the version of myself that could help others when they needed it most, even if it meant hiding from what I needed." "And what did you need?" "I needed to learn that being vulnerable isn't the same as being weak, that letting someone really know me isn't the same as losing myself." David turned off the recorder and leaned forward. "Elena, can I ask you something off the record?" "Sure. What have you learned about love?" Elena paused. They had never used that word between them, though she knew that's what was growing between them. Slow, careful, but undeniable. "I learned that true love isn't about finding someone who completes you," she said finally. "It's about finding someone who accepts you while you're completing yourself, someone who sees you, really sees you, and chooses to stay." David put the recorder aside completely and took her hands. "Eleanor, I love you." The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt her heart race, not from fear but from recognition, as if a part of her that had been asleep for 5 years was finally waking up. "I love you too," she whispered, "and that scares me." "Why?" "Because this time I really have something to lose." David leaned closer, their foreheads almost touching. "Then let's be very careful with each other." When they kissed, their first real kiss, not the hesitant kiss they had shared 2 weeks before, Elena felt like she was finally coming home, not to a place, but to a person. David's article was published 6 weeks later in a national health magazine. Elena read it alone in her apartment, crying as she recognized her own story told through his words. But it wasn't just about her. It was about all the night shift healthcare workers he had interviewed, about the invisible community of people who cared when the world slept. The article went viral. Elena suddenly found herself receiving emails from nurses around the world, sharing their own stories about finding purpose in the quietest shifts. A television network contacted her for an interview. A hospital in Boston offered her a position leading a new nighttime care program. "You created something important," she told David when they met that night in his apartment, which had become a second home for her. "We created it," he corrected, pulling her into his arms on the couch they had chosen together the previous week. "Your story gave me the language to tell stories that matter again." They were in Elena's kitchen, cooking together for the first time. David was slowly relearning tasks that required fine motor coordination, and Elena was slowly relearning how to share her space with another person. "David," she said while cutting vegetables, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you miss who you were before? The journalist who could write complex investigations without thinking twice." David paused, stirring the sauce he was preparing, a recipe his mother had taught him years ago and that he had never made for anyone. "Sometimes," But then I remember the journalist would never have stopped to really get to know you. He would have treated you as a source, not as a person. And now? Now I understand that the best stories aren't about big dramatic events. They're about small moments that change everything, like a nurse deciding to sit and listen to a patient who refused to talk. Elena approached him. Or like a wounded journalist deciding to trust someone who cared for him. Exactly. They kissed there in the kitchen, surrounded by the aroma of garlic and oregano, and Elena thought that maybe this was the real definition of home. Not a place, but a person with whom you could be completely yourself. Not everything was easy. David still had difficult days when his coordination failed, or when the frustration of not being able to write like before consumed him. Elena still struggled with her tendency to withdraw when things became too emotionally intense. Their first real fight happened 4 months after they started dating. David had spent the week working on a difficult article about nursing home corruption, continuation of the investigation that had been interrupted by the accident. He was pushing himself beyond his limits, working late, skipping meals, ignoring headaches. Elena had tried to suggest he should rest, but he didn't listen. "You don't understand," he exploded one night when she suggested he should cancel a deadline. "I need to prove I can still do this." "To whom?" Elena shot back. "To you, or to the person you used to be? What's the difference?" "The difference is that the person you used to be almost died alone because he was so obsessed with work he had nothing else in life." The words fell like stones between them. David stared at her, hurt. "So you think I'm weak now?" "No," Elena said, softer. "I think you're afraid to discover who you are when you're not defining yourself only by work." David walked away, going to Elena's apartment balcony. She followed him after a few minutes. "I am afraid," he admitted without looking at her. "I'm afraid that if I'm not the brilliant, obsessed journalist I was, you'll realize there's nothing interesting about me." Elena sat next to him in the wicker chair she had bought specifically because he liked to sit there and watch the city. "David, do you think I fell in love with you because of your articles? I don't know why you fell in love with me. I fell in love with you because you ask questions that make me think differently about myself, because you listen in a way that makes me feel seen, because you're kind to elderly patients when you visit the hospital and remember to ask about my grandmother even when you have a headache." She took his hand. "I fell in love with the man you became, not with what you lost." They sat in silence for a long time, the sound of city traffic creating a familiar soundtrack to their intertwined lives. "And I'm afraid too," Elena continued. "I'm afraid that you'll realize I'm just a nurse who works nights to run from real life." "Elena, you save lives, literally and figuratively. At least you saved mine. And you tell stories that change how people see the world. We're two people who found purpose in helping others. I don't see why that would be cause for shame." That night, they talked until dawn about fears, expectations, and about how to build something together without losing who they were individually. "I don't want you to change to make me happy," Elena said when the first ray of sunlight began to appear on the horizon. "I want you to be the best version of yourself, and if that means working hard on important stories, then I'll support that. I just don't want you to lose yourself in the process." And I don't want you to hide from me when things get difficult," David replied. "I want you to trust me enough to let me help you when you're struggling." It was a pact, a commitment to be honest with each other even when honesty was uncomfortable. Elena was finishing her shift at the hospital when David showed up, as he did several times a month. It wasn't unusual. He sometimes picked her up when she got out late, especially after some of his articles about healthcare system reforms had generated more regular job offers. "What are you doing here?" she asked, taking off her coat. Her routine had changed slightly. She still worked the night shift, but now by choice, not escape. She had trained a team of night nurses and created care protocols that other hospitals were copying. "I want to show you something." He led her to room 314, now occupied by an elderly lady who slept peacefully. "David, we can't go in there. Just for a minute. The day shift nurse is my friend. She said we could." He gently pulled her into the room. The setup was the same, but it looked different with another patient. "Do you remember the first night we really talked?" David asked. "You said you couldn't write anymore. And you said I would find a new way to tell stories." Elena nodded, confused about where this was going. David took an envelope from his coat. "Well, I found my new way." Inside the envelope was a printed article. The title read, "The Night Shift Nurse, a Story of Love and Second Chances." "David, you can't publish our personal story." "Read it first." Eleanor read quickly. It wasn't invasive or too intimate. It was the story of how two broken people found each other and helped each other heal, but told in a way that protected their privacy while honoring their journey. "It's beautiful," she said, "but I still don't understand why we're here." David knelt beside the bed where he had been as a patient a year ago. "Because this is where I learned that healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about discovering who you can become with someone who loves you exactly as you are." He took a small box from his pocket. "Elena Vasquez, do you want to become something new with me?" Elena looked at him, this man who had arrived in her life unconscious and broken, who had learned to trust again the same way she had learned to love again, who chose to stay every day, even when she was afraid, even when he was frustrated, even when neither of them knew how to do it right. "Yes," she whispered, kneeling down to be at his level. "Yes, I do." A day when they kissed in that room where everything had begun, Elena thought about how life has a strange way of taking you exactly where you need to be, even when, especially when, you don't know you need to be there. Elena still worked the night shift, but now by choice, not escape. She had become supervisor of nighttime care and was developing a national training program for night shift nurses. David had found his niche writing about health and human stories, articles that honored both journalistic rigor and the compassion he had learned as a patient. They married in a small ceremony in the hospital garden, with Elena's colleagues and David's sources as witnesses. The head nurse gave a speech about how she had seen many types of healing in her career, but rarely had she seen two people heal together so beautifully. On their honeymoon, they visited the house where David had grown up, now occupied by a young family. "My parents would be so proud of you," he told Elena as they sat on the porch swing. "They always wanted me to find someone who made me want to be better." "You taught me that getting better doesn't mean becoming perfect," Elena replied. "It means becoming more yourself." In their first home together, a larger apartment with windows that let in plenty of light and space for Elena's plants and David's books, they created routines that honored both their individual needs and their commitment to each other. David wrote in the mornings, after Eleanor came home from work. She slept in the afternoon while he worked. They had dinner together before she went to the hospital, sharing stories of their days. "Do you regret anything?" David asked one night as they walked to the hospital. He accompanied her when the weather allowed. "The accident, Marcus leaving me, the years I spent hiding." "Anything?" Elena thought for a moment. "No, because all of that brought me to you, brought me to us. Even the difficult parts, especially the difficult parts. They taught me that surviving isn't enough, that truly living means being willing to be hurt again, because the alternative is never being truly healed." David stopped walking and pulled her into his arms in the middle of the sidewalk. "I love you, Elena Martinez," he said, using her married name for the first time. "Thank you for teaching me that starting over isn't defeat, it's victory. Thank you for teaching me that loving someone doesn't mean losing yourself. It means finding the best version of who you always were." They kissed as the city prepared for the night, and Elena knew this was the story she had always been destined to live. Not the one she had planned, not the one she had dreamed, but the one that had grown from all the broken parts of her life and transformed them into something beautiful. Elena still worked the night shift 3 nights a week, now as a national consultant for nighttime care programs. David had become editorial director of a foundation that funded investigative journalism focused on public health issues. And together, they were raising 2 extraordinary children, Sofia Elena Martinez, 6 years old, had inherited her mother's medical intuition and her father's journalistic curiosity. She spent afternoons at the hospital with Elena, helping with simple tasks and asking questions that frequently surprised doctors with their insight. Her favorite questions began with why and how can we help better. David Jr., 4 years old, was quieter than his sister, but showed early signs of being a natural observer. He could sit for hours watching David work, making illegible notes in his own reporter's notebook, and occasionally offering insights that were surprisingly astute for his age. "Daddy," he had said recently while David worked on an article about innovations in childhood cancer treatment, "why don't you ask the sick children what they want people to know?" Sometimes adults forget to ask children. Elena and David looked at each other over the children's heads, once again impressed by their children's natural wisdom. It was a Thursday night when Eleanor was finishing her last checks before passing the shift to the day team. She had just left the room of an elderly lady recovering from heart surgery when she found David waiting in the corridor with the children. "What are you all doing here?" she asked, but she was smiling. Even after 10 years together, the sight of him still made her heart skip slightly. "We wanted to show you something," said Sophia, clearly barely containing her excitement. "And we wanted to celebrate," David Jr. added. David held an envelope that Elena recognized as the type used for official correspondence. It arrived today from the National Nursing Foundation. Elena took the envelope with slightly trembling hands. She had applied for a position as National Director of Nighttime Care Innovation, a job that would allow her to influence healthcare policy at the federal level while still maintaining a direct connection to patient care. "Mommy got the job!" Sophia shouted, before Elena even opened the letter. "Sophia, let Mommy read first," David said gently, but Elena could see the pride in his eyes. Elena read the letter quickly, then more slowly, and a third time to make sure she was understanding correctly. "I got it," she whispered. "They want me to lead a national program to transform nighttime care in hospitals across the country." "That means you're going to make hospitals better for everyone," said David Jr. "It means the lessons your mother learned, caring for one person at a time, will help thousands of people," David explained, pulling Eleanor into a hug. As they embraced there in the hospital corridor, where everything had begun, Eleanor thought about the journey that had led them to this moment, from a woman who had chosen the night shift to hide from the world, to someone who was about to influence healthcare on a national scale. From a man who had almost died alone, to someone who had found not just love, but purpose through that connection. "Can I ask you a question?" Elena said to David, while the children explored the familiar hospital corridor. "Always. Do you regret anything? The accident? The time we lost before we met? The years we spent learning to trust each other?" David thought carefully before responding, as he always did with important questions. "No. Because every difficult part, the accident, your relationship with Marcus, my years of loneliness, even our first fight, brought us here. Taught us that real love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about two imperfect people choosing to grow together. And now we have the opportunity to teach our children that second chances are real, that it's possible to build a life that honors both your wounds and your healing. That sometimes the best things grow exactly where you thought nothing could flourish again." Sophia ran back to them, holding a drawing she had made on the back of one of her homework sheets. "It's our family," she explained, showing 4 stick figures in front of what was clearly the hospital. "See, Mommy is helping people feel better, Daddy is telling important stories, and me and David Jr. are learning how to make the world better too." Elena looked at the drawing, technically simple but emotionally perfect, and realized that was exactly what they had built together. Not just a marriage or family, but a legacy. Proof that healing is possible, that love can flourish even in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to find everything that really matters. That night, after the children were asleep and she and David were sitting in their kitchen sharing a bottle of wine to celebrate her new position, Eleanor made an observation. "Do you know what's the best part of our story? Tell me. It's not that we lived happily ever after. It's that we learned to be happy in the process of living. How to find joy, not just in the destination, but in the journey." David raised his glass. "To journeys that teach us to love better. To accidents that become blessings. To midnight conversations that change everything. To finding home, not in a place, but in a person," Eleanor added. "To proving that sometimes wounded people become the best healers. And to teaching our children that love worth having is love worth fighting for, waiting for, and growing in." Dean, they toasted under the soft light of their kitchen, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived together. Children's drawings on the refrigerator, books scattered across counters, plants thriving in every window, and photographs capturing moments of pure happiness that neither had thought possible years before. When Eleanor finally fell asleep that night, wrapped in David's arms, as happened every night for almost a decade, she thought about all the patients she had cared for over the years. People who had arrived broken and scared, who had healed not just through medicine, but through human connection. She had learned from each of them, but more importantly, she had learned that healing is a gift you give not just to others, but to yourself when you're brave enough to accept it. The night shift was never lonely again, because Elena had learned that sometimes the best things in life don't come when you're looking for them. They come when you're ready to receive them. And sometimes readiness looks like a woman brave enough to sit beside a stranger's bed and believe her presence matters. Sometimes it looks like a man willing to admit he needs another person to be complete. But always, always, it looks like two people choosing each other again and again, even when, especially when, they don't know how the story will end. If this story touched your heart the way it touched mine, leave a comment about which part most inspired you. Remember that sometimes the right people come into our lives exactly when we need to learn. That starting over isn't giving up. It's having the courage to believe our story isn't finished yet. The best love stories aren't about finding perfection, but about finding someone willing to grow through imperfection with you. And remember always that healing is possible, that second chances are real, and that sometimes the most devastating accidents are actually blessings in disguise.